Over the past few years, the US men's national team January camp, aka Camp Cupcake, has been getting us less and less interested. If you don't know, Camp Cupcake is the one camp of the year where we essentially only bring MLS-based players. In the past, it made total sense. A good chunk of the roster was playing in MLS, players fighting for roster spots were playing in MLS, and even some key players. But times have changed for the US men's national team. MLS also has been selling a lot of the players abroad at a very young age, to their credit. So does Camp Cupcake have to come to an end? Can they even end it? Or should we adapt it to the current state of Major League Soccer and the US men's national team? Why don't we talk about it? Hello. If you're new here, I'm Filippo and welcome to Tactical Manager TV. And today, we're going to be talking about the 2025 Camp Cupcake this January. By the way, regardless of what you think about Camp Cupcake, I kind of hate cupcakes. Okay, so the January roster was released, and when you look at it, there ain't much to talk about when it comes to, serious US men's national team conversations to have. But the camp is most certainly something we can talk about. Now, before we start, make sure to drop a like in this video, because if you don't, you'll be forced to watch Camp Cupcake twice. No one wants that. No one. And let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below on what should be done with it. Should we end it? Adapt it? What is even the purpose of this camp these days? Okay, let's begin. Alright, now before we start, there are two tweets that I want to go through that are about the January camp, alright, because they're relevant. The first one being from Jimmy Conrad. And this is what Jimmy had to say when the roster came out. I got called in to my first US men's national team camp in January of 2005. And 18 months later, I was playing in the World Cup. Everything is possible. What are you looking at? You think I'm going to shit on that tweet? He's actually right. And I'm serious. He is right. He presented his personal experience as evidence. The one reason I brought up this specific tweet is because there's one thing I want to add here that actually proves my point that times have changed. And that was in 2005 that Jimmy Conrad was talking about. It's different now. The 2026 roster could very well have like 2 to 3 MLS players max. It would have even less if we had good goalkeepers. The 2006 World Cup roster that Jimmy Conrad got called in had 11 MLS players. Now in 2010, it's a bit of a surprise. That roster had only 4 MLS players. Now in 2014, when Jurgen Klinsmann was in charge, we had 10 MLS players. But in 2018, we had an incredible 0 MLS players in our World Cup roster because we didn't qualify. So as I said, times have changed. What Jimmy said, there's nothing wrong with it. It is true. It's a fact. It happened with him. But times have changed, and this camp is not as useful as it used to be. And I want to add that I don't think anyone in this camp will earn a future opportunity based on what they do in any of these games against Costa Rica or Venezuela, or at least they shouldn't, and I'll explain that later. Now, the other tweet was one from Goals TV. They shared a bunch of quotes from Jurgen Klinsmann talking about the January camp when he was in the Kickin' It show with CBS. And this is what Jurgen had to say. As coaches, we didn't want to have the January camp either. The main reason why the Federation does the January camp is because they have 2 television slots to fulfill. So they find 2 teams, whether it's in Scandinavia or, South America, Central America, because they have similar breaks or similar schedules. They fill them with 2 names and get 2 games out of it so they can fulfill that TV contract. So Jurgen's essentially saying that the only reason it exists is because of the TV contract. But then he added one positive and he said, the good thing about the January camp was to see some players you haven't seen before, some young players, promising players, and see how far they can take it and scout for the next upcoming games. Jeff Cameron was one of those players that I saw for the first time in the January camp. So you were happy to find a couple players like that. So that comes to what I'm going to talk about later in the video, where this camp should only be used to find young players. Anything else these days is completely pointless and useless. But Klinsmann had something else to say. And he said, did I suggest the Federation to get rid of the January camp? Yes, I did. And it didn't go well. They said we have to fulfill these 2 dates for the television contract. We have to do it. It's simple as that. So the 2 big takeaways that I've had here from what Klinsmann said is one, the federation only does it because of a TV deal and they ain't getting rid of it. So Camp Cupcake ain't going anywhere. It's here to stay. So we can't end it, we have to adapt it. Then he mentioned young players like Jeff Cameron at the time, and that is what I'm going to focus on. That should be the purpose of this camp and any future Camp Cupcake that we have in January. And understand, if we had the option of getting rid of it, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't really care. But since it's here to stay, we might as well maximize it. Okay, now I want to go through 2 previous Camp Cupcakes that recently happened to show you how at times it can be detrimental for the US men's national team, but there are moments where it can be also very positive. So let's start with the one in 2021, which to me was a nightmare. If I could, I would have slept through this one. And if I slept through it, I'm pretty sure that specific cupcake would have become Freddy Krueger and attacked me and haunted me in my dreams. But to be honest, it would probably be better to be attacked by Freddy Krueger in my dreams or in my nightmares instead of watching that shit show that was the 2021 Camp Cupcake. By shit show, I mean just waste of time, right? We won both games, but it was just crap. So remember when I said that you should not get future opportunities based on what you do during this camp? Well, the 2021 camp is a great example. And this one specifically was the last Camp Cupcake prior to the World Cup qualifying for the 2022 World Cup. This was the camp, if you remember, where Jesus Ferreira had like 5 goal contributions against Trinidad and Tobago's reserve team, and Pariola had like 3 in that same game. And I firmly believe that those performances are part of the reasons why they got favorable treatment from Berhalter going forward. It could even be it could have even played a small role for why Jesus Ferreira and Pariola were playing World Cup qualifying and why Jesus Ferreira even made it to the World Cup. Because sometimes performances like, against these awful opponents can create a false perception of the level of that player. And that can do some damage over the long term if the coach is an imbecile. Now, it's also not just on the coach, because a lot of the fans were defending these players at times, not most, but some, because of performances against games like this, saying that they show up when the team needs. I mean, there were also some very crazy takes that same camp. If you don't remember, that was the same camp we trashed El Salvador, I believe. Their B team, by the way, not the A team, El Salvador's B team. And Chris Miller, that played for Orlando City at the time, played very well that game. And there were people, and I kid you not, that were saying on Twitter at the time that Chris Miller was going to challenge Christian Pulisic. Seriously, that was their big take after they watched the guy play well against El Salvador's B or C team in the United States of America. That was a serious take. And don't get me started about the media. I'm not going to talk about them today because I don't feel like it. I've been sick all week. I'm not dealing with that today. So I guess the overall point here is take good performances during Camp Cupcake with a grain of salt, which very often that doesn't happen. People overreact and bad things happen after. So now I want to talk about the one in 2024. And in 2024, Greg Berhalter, to his credit, brought in Esmir Bajraktarovic, an 18-year-old winger that was playing for the New England Revolution at the time. That most, including myself, were not very aware of him, right? We didn't really watch him play much. He came in and he played very well. From there, we started to track him, and the kid, in fact, is extremely talented. He just got a move to PSV. He's also Bosnian American, so I'm pretty much assuming that Berhalter also called him up to try to recruit him. So essentially this camp, it was useful because you were able to test and showcase a young talent and recruit promising dual nationals. Now, unfortunately, we did lose Esmir to Bosnia. He doesn't play for the United States anymore. He's 19, he's going to PSV, and he has chosen to play for the Bosnian national team. But again, credit where it's due. What Berhalter did of bringing Esmir into camp is how we should treat all camps going forward. Bring young talented prospects, mostly U21 players, we're going to talk about that in a second, and try to use it to recruit dual nationals, which Esmir was a dual national. All you can do is bring him in, try to recruit him. If he chooses to play for another national team, there's not much you can do about it. Okay, now let's talk about the current roster. And before we do, if you made it this far, don't forget to smash the like button in this video. So the current roster that Pochettino brought has 24 players and an average age of 25.5, which for this camp, in my opinion, it's a bit too high. It's very mediocre, and as Thumper from Bambi once said, if you can't say nothing nice, don't say nothing at all. But unfortunately, even when I don't have anything nice to say, I still say stuff, and I do have to say a few things because of some players that he called up, or at least one specific player. I'm not going to criticize, again, the same guys as always, Shaq Moore, Walker Zimmerman. Like, you know who I'm talking about. But there's one player that I want to talk about. And his name is Marko Miljevic, because he was called in. He played in MLS, but last season he was playing in Argentina. And he is currently unemployed because this dude cannot behave. Apparently he spits on people and he gets into fights in amateur tournaments that he shouldn't be playing. This guy might be essentially an overgrown toddler. But you know, Pochettino called him up for whatever reason. The only players I can see Pochettino bringing into any camp with the A team from now till the World Cup would be maybe Tim Ream, Patrick Schulte, maybe another goalkeeper like Matt Freese, possibly Miles Robinson, even though he shouldn't be there, and maybe John Token as a backup left back because we lack depth there. And then when it comes to the World Cup roster, I could see only some of the goalkeepers making it, no one else. And you're going to say, oh, what about Tim Ream? He's old, man. He's super old, and he's declining in MLS. So I don't know if he's going to make it to the World Cup. It could be that in this roster, only one or two of the goalkeepers make the World Cup roster. No one else. I would actually say that it's more likely that happens. But for this camp, I'll say this. I am mostly interested in Diego Luna, Jack McGlynn, Jalen Neal, Ben Kramaski, Caden Clark playing and doing well. They're all young enough. They're like 21 and younger. So they have time to develop, go abroad, and become really good players. But I'm just going to be real here with you. We will cover this camp. We will cover both games. But there's really not that much to look forward to. I mean, unless Miljevic like spits on someone or gets into a fight. I mean, if he spits on someone, that would be kind of funny. So that would be like the only thing. But in all seriousness, yes, I'm going to watch the games. We will cover the games and we'll have fun. We'll have a good time. But there's not that much to read into in this camp. So we're not going to do the 7 things we learned. We're not going to do previews and things like that. My overall point, there's no meaningful U.S. men's national team conversation with the players that we have in this camp, for the most part. Okay, so before we end it, what do I think we should do with Camp Cupcake going forward? Well, first and foremost, we keep it, right? We can't end it. But I believe this camp should become a U22 camp. So players that are 22 years old or younger, and you can only bring overage players if they are close to making the A roster. Because keep in mind, there's no point on bringing players like Brian White, Shaquille Moore, Indiana Vasilev at this point of his career. Like seriously, if you're going to bring those players, just bring a 16-year-old or 15-year-old Kevin Sullivan. Can he contribute now? Absolutely not. Maybe in the future? Sure, so bring him instead of them. There's no point on bringing these players. So it should become essentially a youth camp. But of course, if you have players like goalkeepers that are 25, 26 that can possibly make the A roster, bring them. Tim Ream, he could make the roster in March. Bring him. Miles Robinson, I think that one for this camp is justifiable. And a few players here and there. But besides that, it doesn't make much sense. And of course, use it to recruit dual nationals. I think it's important. You bring them in, you talk to them, make them feel at home, welcome, and it can help in the recruiting process. All right, everyone, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to drop a like before you go. On Monday, we have the U.S. Men's National Team Abroad episode. And then obviously next week when they play for Camp Cupcake, I believe it's next week or the week after, we will be covering the games here at the channel. We will be doing live watch-alongs. I want to thank you all very much for watching and have a great day.